What happens in your digestive tract when more than half of what you're eating is not actual food? I'm Dr. Robynne Chutkan, gastroenterologist, microbiome expert, and author, and I am here to help you find gut bliss. On today's show, you know that feeling when you're eating certain foods and you just can't stop? It's that bag of chips or pint of ice cream that says 4 servings on it, but it feels like 1. And even after you eat the entire bag or the whole pint, you still don't feel satisfied. I am talking about ultra-processed foods, otherwise known as UPFs, edible food-like substances that we used to refer to as junk food, and that are engineered to make you want to keep eating. But UPFs aren't confined to just junk food anymore. They make up a lot of the foods that you probably think of as health foods, and they do way more than just make you want to keep eating. More than 50% of all the calories that we are now eating in countries like the US and the UK are UPFs. And their regular consumption has been tied to lots and lots of different health problems, especially in the gut. So today, I want to provide you with a clear definition of what a UPF is. I'm going to tell you about the problems they create in your digestive tract, and then I'm going to give you some practical tips for how to avoid them without going hungry. And I want to give a shout out here to Chris Van Tulleken's book, Ultra Processed People. Detailed must-know information about what these foods are doing to your body and your brain, and how in addition to making you sick, they're also increasing your risk of dying prematurely. We're going to start off with a little bit of background on the NOVA classification of foods, which is where the term ultra-processed food derives from. The NOVA classification comes from the work of Dr. Carlos Monteiro from Brazil. His early research in the late 1970s focused on malnutrition, but in the mid-1990s, Monteiro observed a major shift in the health landscape of Brazil. There was a huge rise in obesity rates amongst one group in particular: lower socioeconomic populations. Poor people in Brazil who had previously been at risk for malnutrition were now suffering from obesity. And this shift led Monteiro to focus on dietary patterns instead of just individual nutrients. And he identified 2 distinct eating patterns in Brazil. One was rooted in traditional foods, like rice and beans, that people were preparing at home, and the other was characterized by the consumption of highly processed, ready-to-eat products. The NOVA framework identifies 4 different food groups that are based on the ingredients as well as a type of processing that is used to make the product, and that paints a much more accurate and comprehensive picture of the health of the food, as opposed to just focusing on the ingredients alone. After all, we can make car tires from corn, but based on the industrial processes used to make car tires, we would not consider them a healthy food group. When we come back, the definition of an ultra-processed food and the 4 groups in the NOVA classification. The Gut Bliss podcast is brought to you by VisBiome, my first and quite frankly, my only choice for a probiotic. Whether you're dealing with irritable bowel syndrome or just looking to restore your gut health, VisBiome can help. It's a medical food for the dietary management of IBS and gut inflammation, backed by science and clinically vetted by thousands of my own patients. Find your gut bliss with VisBiome. Go to visbiome.com/gutbliss and use discount code GUTBLISS at checkout. So what exactly is an ultra-processed food? UPFs are industrially formulated products that contain synthetic ingredients and minimal or sometimes no whole food whatsoever. The processing methods used to make UPFs make them easy for your digestive tract to absorb them, which often ends up leading to a spike in your glucose levels, and that's why they are a risk factor for developing diabetes. They're usually calorie-dense foods that are high in sugar, salt, fat, and additives, all the things you generally don't want, and low in protein, fiber, and micronutrients. the things we actually should be eating. Examples of UPFs include things like soft drinks, prepackaged meals, frozen pizza or waffles, processed meat products, and packaged snacks like chips. I'm going to go through groups 1, 2, and 3 of the NOVA classification, and then we're going to circle back to group 4, the ultra-processed foods, and spend some more time discussing those. So group 1, unprocessed or minimally processed foods. These are the edible parts of plants and animals. That's unprocessed foods. Minimally processed foods are modified through industrial methods like crushing, drying, pasteurization, fermentation, freezing, and other preservation techniques that maintain the food's integrity without introducing salt, sugar, oils, fats, or other ingredients. And there are no additives in this group, in group 1 of unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Examples of this would be fresh or frozen fruits and vegetables, grains, legumes, fresh meat, eggs, milk, plain yogurt. Group 2, processed culinary ingredients. These are ingredients that are derived from group 1 foods or directly from nature by additional processing like refining, grinding, milling, or drying. These ingredients are mostly used in seasoning meals that are homemade and prepared from scratch. They usually don't have additives, but some products in group 2 may have added vitamins or minerals, like iodized salt that has iodine in it. Examples of group 2 foods include oils produced through crushing seeds, nuts, or fruit, like olive oil, salt, sugar, vinegar, honey, agave, butter. These are all ingredients that I typically have in my kitchen and I use to prepare meals. Group 3, processed foods. Processed foods are basically a combination of group 1 and group 2. So they are processed culinary ingredients, group 2, like salt or sugar, plus unprocessed or minimally processed group 1 foods. The processing that we're talking about here includes things like baking, boiling, canning, bottling, and fermentation. Additives are usually present in these foods to enhance the shelf life or improve the taste. And examples would be things like cheese, canned vegetables, salted nuts, fruits and syrup, and dried or canned fish. Okay, so now we are going to get to the heart of the matter. Group 4, ultra-processed foods. These are industrially manufactured food products with multiple ingredients, including sugar, oils, fats, and salt, usually in much higher amounts than in group 3 processed foods, as well as food substances that are not normally used in cooking, like high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated oils, modified starches, and protein isolates. These are ingredients that you would never have in your kitchen or pantry. Another defining feature of ultra-processed foods is that group 1 foods, those unprocessed or minimally processed foods, are either completely absent or present in very small amounts in the formulation. And when I say formulation, you probably think of a chemistry experiment, which is exactly what you should be thinking of when you think of these foods, a chemistry experiment on you. So how do you formulate these ultra-processed edible food-like substances? These products are made via industrial techniques like extrusion, where you push material through a hole to create a specific shape to make things like pasta and breakfast cereal and puffed snacks. Molding is another industrial manufacturing technique that uses heat and pressure to shape material into a specific form using a mold. But it's not the shape of these foods that's a problem. It's the excessive amount of additives, things like flavors and colorants and non-sugar sweeteners and emulsifiers whose function is to make the final product palatable or hyper-palatable, meaning the product is so appealing that you literally cannot stop eating it. And that is exactly the goal. UPFs are made with specific combinations of fat, sugar, sodium, and carbohydrates that trigger your brain's reward system and makes them very hard to resist. They're a huge contributor to the obesity crisis. Our genes have not changed in the last few decades to explain the skyrocketing rates of obesity that we're seeing, And most people aren't gorging on massive servings of unprocessed food. What they're doing is they're consuming more and more of these energy-rich, nutrient-poor foods and gaining a lot of weight as a result of that. When we come back, what else do UPFs do to your body besides make you gain weight? I want to be really clear here about the goal of UPFs. This entire process is designed to create highly profitable, long shelf life, convenient, hyper-palatable alternatives to freshly prepared dishes and meals. UPFs are different from Group 3 processed foods, not just because of how they're made, but because of what they contain. Substances of no nutritional value, like high fructose corn syrup, maltodextrin, modified starches, hydrogenated oils, protein isolate, and additives with cosmetic functions like flavor enhancers, colors, emulsifiers, thickeners, and anti-foaming agents. Nothing about these foods is nourishing. In fact, they are anti-nourishing. And the reality is that most of our diet is now ultra-processed. And that includes a lot of foods that are marketed as health foods, like flavored yogurt and granola bars and plant-based milks and gluten-free products and protein bars and collagen powders. I was at a health and wellness conference recently, and the products they had in the goodie bags when you registered were all ultra-processed foods. Protein bars and chips and a bunch of other edible food-like things that I would never recommend eating. But this is what is being pushed by a lot of the health influencers out there as actually good for you. I have been a gastroenterologist for almost 30 years, and I can tell you with certainty that this crap will mess up your gut. Ultra-processed foods, UPFs, have a number of negative effects on the gut. Emulsifiers, sweeteners, colors, and microparticles in these products have a profound impact on your gut microbiome and your intestinal lining. The nutritional composition, the fact that they're low in fiber and high in fat and sugar, plus all the synthetic additives, can create chronic intestinal inflammation. UPFs can change the composition of your gut bacteria, leading to decreased diversity and a state of dysbiosis, microbial imbalance, which we know is associated with a wide range of health problems, including autoimmune disease, obesity, allergies, and even some types of cancer. Emulsifiers and thickeners that are commonly used in UPFs, substances like lecithin, xanthan gum, tapioca starch, and carrageenan, can damage your gut lining, leading to an increase in intestinal permeability known as leaky gut. And this can increase your risk of food allergies, chronic inflammation, and autoimmune disease, especially if you have a genetic predisposition to autoimmune disease. UPFs are associated with gut diseases like IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, which consists of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. They are associated with colon cancer, with irritable bowel syndrome. Now, they may not be the only cause of these conditions, but they are definitely a contributing factor. They can cause GI symptoms like gas, bloating, cramps, diarrhea, constipation, and of course, weight gain because your digestive tract does not signal that you're full after eating them. If we look at a map of the world, we see this rising incidence of autoimmune diseases like IBD, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, diabetes in parts of the world that are becoming more westernized, like sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, certain countries in South America. This increase coincides with the increase in UPF consumption over the last few decades. So it's not just an increase in obesity in these parts of the world like Dr. Monteiro saw in Brazil, it's also an increase in chronic diseases. A recently published study that was done in 250,000 people looked at the link between UPFs and IBD, and they found that higher UPF intake was associated with an increased risk of IBD, particularly Crohn's disease, and especially for ultra-processed breads and breakfast foods, frozen or shelf-stable ready-to-eat meals, and sauces, cheeses, and spreads. The reality is that none of us should be eating UPFs on a regular basis. But if you have an autoimmune disease, not just a gut-based autoimmune disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, but any autoimmune disease, you need to avoid these foods as much as possible. In my medical practice, we have a success rate of about 79% for helping patients with inflammatory bowel disease get off biologics and steroids and other immunosuppressive drugs using diet and lifestyle techniques. And the number one dietary technique that we use is to eliminate ultra-processed foods from our patients' diet. We also ramp up the amounts of fresh fruits and vegetables that people are eating. But the number one strategy is to get rid of the UPFs in the diet. And I remember one of my GI colleagues asking me years ago, he said to me, "Does that really make a difference?" And I said to him, "Are you asking me if what you put in your GI tract affects what's going on there? Are you kidding me?" The most important thing, if you are struggling with any kind of GI issue, especially an autoimmune disease, is to eliminate these foods from your diet. Is that easy to do? No. But it is absolutely essential to stop the ongoing damage to your gut microbiome and your gut lining and to heal intestinal inflammation. No amount of supplements or probiotics is going to heal your gut if you are not also paying attention to the things that are damaging it. I want to leave you with 3 important takeaways about ultra-processed foods. Number 1, you must read the ingredients on the package. I want you to ignore the health claims and the nutrition facts. That is all just marketing. If the ingredient list contains substances that you do not normally stock in your kitchen or pantry, or that you don't recognize as an actual food, do not eat that product. If the ingredients sound like they belong in a chemistry lab, that's because they do. Artificial flavor, glycerin, citric acid, potassium sorbate, red 40, soy lecithin, mineral oil, those are just some of the ingredients in Twizzlers, a partial list. Not to pick on Twizzlers, these are common ingredients in many, if not most, of the foods that we are consuming on a daily basis, and particularly what our young people are consuming. Number 2, if you don't feel like reading the ingredient list, I have another idea for you. Purchase foods that don't have an ingredient list or just have one ingredient listed. Apples, a bag of rice, a piece of fish, dried beans. When you look at the food, I want you to think, did this food make a stop in the factory to get to me? So corn on the cob, go for it. Corn chips, no. Rice, yes, eat that. Rice Krispies, no. Oats, yes. Oat milk, no. Farm, yes. Factory, no. And number 3, we live in the real world, and it is virtually impossible to never eat an ultra-processed food. But you want to make sure that these foods are not making up more than 10% of your diet. And that is particularly important if you have an underlying chronic disease. So that's it for this edition of the Gut Bliss podcast on ultra-processed foods and the NOVA classification. Go to gutbliss.com for my free 7-day microbiome reboot course. If you like what you're hearing, drop a review and hit that subscribe button. And remember, dirt, sweat, vegetables, the best prescription for a healthy gut.
The information presented in this show is not meant to be medical advice. Consult your doctor before making any decisions about your health. The patients discussed are real people, but names and identifying features have been changed to protect their privacy.